Good morning and welcome to Northern Lights Spiritual Center. We are a community of people dedicated to using spiritual and practical principles to create lives we want to live. Northern Lights Spiritual Center offers practical and spiritual tools to make positive changes in our lives. We at Northern Lights Spiritual Center acknowledge our presence here on the traditional and unceded ancestral lands of the First Peoples of Seattle, the Duwamish and Salish peoples. These people are still here, and we join with them in how they continue to honor and bring to light their ancient heritage. We seek to resist the erasure of Indigenous histories, and as we work towards honoring and inviting the truth. To open, we will sing In This Very Room by Ron and Carol Harris. Please join me. In this very room, there's quite enough love for all the world. And in this very room, there's quite enough joy for all the world. And there's quite enough peace and quite enough power to walk through our every fear. For Spirit, sweet Spirit, is in this very room.
Now's the time we set aside each Sunday morning for a brief meditation, a brief centering of self. And I just invite you to, wherever you are, to get comfortable as you can. To allow yourself to be present in this very moment. Releasing anything that has come before and anything that will come after. But you can pick all these up later on if you choose to. But for the present moment, allow yourself that freedom to be at peace, at ease, and centered. And during this time, I invite you to, if you so choose, to contemplate the idea, the question of who am I? Who are we? As individuals, as a group, as a community, who are we in this moment? And what do you see when you look at someone else in the eye? But actually what you see on the outside probably isn't what is on the inside. And so, who are you? And who are we? Where have we evolved from? And where are we evolving to? I invite you now, if you're comfortable, to come back to your surroundings. And to open your eyes. And so it is. And for the reading today, I'm going to read the Center for Spiritual Living's Global Vision. We see a world that works for everyone. Where all life is honored as an expression of the divine. Where people live according to spiritual truth. Where humanity awakens to spiritual magnificence. Where humanity discovers personal creative power. Where we live as one global family. Where we live as one global family. Where kinship with all life prospers. Where unity and connection is emphasized. Where forgiveness is the norm. Where spiritual guidance is valued. Where we are called to conscious social action. Where people have enough food, homes, and a sense of well-being. Where there is peace, harmony, and justice for all. Where resources are valued, cared, and shared. Where communities are meaningfully involved in service to the world. And where there is a renewed emphasis on beauty, nature, creativity, art, and the aesthetics. And so it is.
Well, hello again. Please join me for our August chant. The words are: unity does not mean conformity. Diversity respects all that I can be. Will I come to see myself as a wave in the ocean? Each step that I take as the motion of the one. Creation calls to me, sings to me, reaches me as part of its blessing on earth. And then the second round through is the you. The third verse is we, and then comes back to the I. Unity does not mean my conformity. Diversity respects all that I can be. Will I come to see myself as a wave in the ocean? Each step that I take has the motion of the one. Creation calls to me, sings to me, reaches me as part of its blessing on earth. Now second verse, you. Unity does not mean your conformity. Diversity respects all that you can be. Will you come to see yourself as a wave in the ocean? Each step that you take has the motion of the one. Creation calls to me, sings to me, reaches me as part of its blessing on earth. Third verse, we. Unity does not mean our conformity. Diversity respects all that we can be. Will we come to see ourselves as the wave in the ocean? Each step that we take has the motion of the one. Creation calls to me, sings to me, reaches me as part of its blessing on earth. And back to I. Unity does not mean I conform. Diversity respects all that I can be. Will I come to see myself as a wave on the ocean? Each step that I take has the motion of the one. Creation calls to me, sings to me, reaches me as part of its blessing on earth.
You do it every year, but it never gets old. Pack everyone in the car and head out to the beach.
Well, hello. Today's talk is based around the idea of who are we? And with this month around unity and inclusion, who are we is going to generate two sets of actions that I'm going to invite us to take. If you're at home, I would have you go and get a piece of paper. So I'll wait a couple of minutes and what I want each of us to do for a moment now is I'd like us to close our eyes and I'd like us to feel about some or some things that inspire us. So just start by writing the name of the first being that comes to mind, who is that source of inspiration. We're going to be identifying three different people. So consider that first person. And as we consider that first person or first being or first entity or first one, consider an attribute that seems core or fundamental to that being. So as an example, for me, oftentimes the first one that comes to my mind is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And the automatic association I make with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is justice. The deliverer of justice. The seeker of justice. One who would fight for justice. So allow yourself to just associate what it is that being generates for you. And when you've got that, let yourself become aware of the second being. And again, so the invitation will be to write down the name. Right, I see that Reverend Pamela Grace is on, so you could draw or sketch an image of the person, the being, the one. And then similarly, like we did, to identify a key characteristic, a feature, a quality. So again, just to illustration, the one that popped up today for me was Maya Angelou. And with Maya Angelou, it was the capacity to speak truth, to write about truth, to be a sojourner of truth, to be the voice, the words, the expression. That even in the course of her life, when she was shut up and shut down, there was something that pushed through, something that she allowed to let herself become. And when you've kind of captured that one, finally we're going to come to a third. And just let the presence of that one become available to you. And maybe you can imagine yourself sitting at their feet. Maybe you can imagine yourself throwing a ball back and forth with this one. Playing a game with this one. I mentioned those diverse ways of being with them so that there is a freedom to recognize that choice, a freedom to recognize the power of that presence. So identify them. Finally, identify the key characteristics of that one. And for me, today, the person that I'm going to identify as my third person is my sister, Lisa. And as I identify Lisa, I'm struck by two primary characteristics. Actually, three characteristics. A capacity for selfless giving. I mean, on Zoom, we have Stephanie Scranton, who engaged in the same kind of selfless giving. My sister donated to me. Stephanie donated a kidney to her mother. And I think about my sister as also somebody who gave generously by listening. When she finished college, came back to live with my mom and with my brother, just was a listening presence that took in their stories. A way that she demonstrates this is that she's a DJ for a program, and each week she generates this 3-hour program of a series of songs, the Great American Classics. And she puts together these amazing performances and these amazing programs. So she was able to listen to all of these stories and take them in, so that when she shares it from this lived experience. What it was like for my uncle to have heard these performers for the first time. What it was like for my grandmother to have heard Louis Armstrong and her reaction to Louis Armstrong. What it was like for my mother. And she retells these stories. And as she's served on this station, she's heard the stories of others. So she's both this place of generosity, this selfless giving, and she's able to return what others have given to her. Now, many of you may have recognized this exercise as a way that we can learn more about ourselves. Because those characters, those figures, those heroes and heroines, those speakers of truth, of justice, of kindness, of goodness, of generosity, they are our guides. And there is this process where what resounds in the world around us is what is alive within us. So those characteristics that inspire us, I invite us to consider that those are the very characteristics, as they inspire us, those are the drives. Those are the ways that we value for moving through the world. They are our fundamental features of who we are. Then for this week is to watch ourselves as we go through this week and watch how we live out those values. Watch how, as stories come up, as events, as circumstances arise, that there is something within us that wants to meet those circumstances with these qualities, the elements of our identity. So who we are, in part, is the reflection of who has inspired us, who has encouraged us, who has driven us, who has lifted us, who has made us better celebrate the world, to see the world, to understand it. A second way of thinking about who we are each one of us is a multitude. If you woke up this morning and looked in the mirror, you look exactly the same as you have your entire life. And unless I am in a very peculiar group of people, the answer would be no. None of us are the same today as we were yesterday, or as we were a year ago, or 10 years ago, or 20 years ago. As we move forward in life, are this collection of all kinds of ways of being in the world. There is no single one of us. Our ego is about trying to collect that into a single being. And one of the things that can be a little bit crazy making is that not necessarily pieces don't necessarily fit together. Again, I don't know about you, but I know for me that sometimes I'm at odds with myself. Has anyone ever had that experience? element of me that watches me and thinks, what am I doing? Doing that? How can you be thinking that? A good explanation of this came from the author Ann Wilson Schaaf. In a book, she did a whole series of work around dependency and codependency. And Ann Wilson Schaaf marked this out, describing herself as describing a simple process for herself as a woman. She talked about when she was an adolescent, she was taught to shave her legs because that was what was done. And then she became acquainted with the feminist movement, and members of the feminist movement said, you shouldn't have to shave your legs. You shouldn't have to you shouldn't have to go back to some presentation that is pre-adolescent, that isn't who you are as the being you are now. So she had this first presentation where her legs got hairy and she shaved them because that was what the norm was. And then the feminist ideas came to her and said, you shouldn't have to do that. So there was a period of time that she didn't shave her legs and that she proudly showed her legs the way they were. And then she got to the point, though, where she noticed that when she shaved her legs during the summer, she liked the way it felt. And she came to the conclusion that she didn't have to be presenting in a specific way all the time. If she wanted to have shaven legs during the summer, she could make the choice. She could be independent about that. She didn't have to follow directives so that she was suiting a particular audience. And she described how, as an older woman, she made the decision that sometimes she's going to shave her legs and sometimes she isn't. And as she came to that, she acknowledged that there were injunctions, there were directives, there were encouragements, there were ways of being in the world that she could independently choose to follow them. And she could let go of the idea that there's one right way for her. That the only way of being in the world was either to have her legs shaven or unshaven. And rather than judging, because that was where things had come from, there had been a place of judgment. When she was first taught about shaving her legs, it was, that's what beauty looks like. It judged beauty. And then there was a judgment about, well, you shouldn't care about someone else's idea about beauty. You should just recognize yourself as beautiful. And what she came to realize is that she doesn't have to live from a single place. Ralph Waldo Emerson talked about, well, two things. He talked about conformity as not necessarily the highest way of being. And a lot of times, the me's and the I's and the we's, we try to conform with the world around us because we think that we have to do that to fit in. And Ralph Waldo Emerson proposed that we could release our attraction to conformity. Release the insistent call to be a certain way. So one of the elements about recognizing who we are is about paying attention moment by moment by moment to whose directions we're following, whose injunctions we are accepting. One of the big things about being a we is about fit in. And sometimes, well, I can't speak for you, but have others found that they've had to let go of part of themselves in order to fit in somewhere else? And what I would propose about a more mature spiritual expression, a more mature way of being in the world, is to consider what's called for at any given moment in time. And again, I can't speak for anyone else here, but there can be an external demand for a kind of consistency that if we have deviated from our path and we have been inconsistent, that's wrong with us. This is happening on a really big scale right now with respect to the coronavirus. There have been physicians, Dr. Fauci as an example, who has been criticized because he has said different things at different times. And how can we believe any of it if he says different things at different times? Well, the answer really is not all that complicated. It's that as time has gone on, new things have been learned. New things have been understood. When he first spoke, he spoke with the knowledge that he had. And as new information becomes available, he has new things to say. And rather than holding to what he initially said, he has changed the ideas that get presented because there's new information to be responding to. Just imagine if we had to pick a single way of being in the world and that was all that we had available to us. So the proposal that I'm inviting is that each of us comes to the world and there are new me's each moment. There are new yous each moment. And we have a choice about how to respond to that new me and that new you and that new us. We can get into a position of judgment and back, saying that lack of consistency is a flaw or is a failure or is something wrong. I place before you the question, if you had to stick with the same idea, the same being all the time, do you think that's particularly adaptive? Do you think that lets you live in the world in the highest and best possible way? One of the things that I really appreciate about the Science of Mind teaching is how it incorporated Darwin's idea of evolution. Science of Mind drew from ideas in science. And what's one of the qualities of science? Science keeps evolving. Darwin proposed evolution over time. And you probably know that people got into great distress and aggravation whether to teach Darwin has come forward to the courts because it's a different idea than what came from the Bible, that God did this on day 1, this on day 2, this on day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, and day 7 it was done, complete. People were very disturbed at the idea that there could be some relationship between human beings and monkeys. The invitation is to become aware of when and how we evolve and what we let evolve with us. So, first point I've made so far is that who we are gets to be reflected in who has inspired us. The second idea of who we are is that we are this history of ourselves moving and being and living in the world. And we get to decide, to choose what is adaptive and what is responsive to the world at any given time. The last thing that I want to talk about with respect to the who we are is the imposition of unconscious biases. That when we're little, taught certain things. This is right, this is wrong. This person is this way, this person is this way. Which way is better? There's been a lot of work around the processes of biases. That we don't see what really is because we look at the world through the lenses of our biases. And the only way around that is to either persist in our biased take on. I participated this week in an interview, and for the first question of the person that we interviewed, they gave a really terrible answer. Why do you want to work as this? Well, I live there. I live there really isn't a great response for why you want to. What can you contribute? Well, I live there, so I'm not going to be driving. Wasn't really the best answer. The process of biases, how often do we let that first color everything else that comes forward? As the interview went on, there were some really amazing things that this person said. So I think in the score that, there were 4 of us doing the interview. One person, I was the second highest scorer. I didn't let that first answer knock off all the rest that was so positive. But if I had relied on biases, I would have kept looking for that one answer. there's another thing, another kind of bias called anchor bias. As soon as we learn something about someone, sometimes we will just stick with that one piece of that fact that we've learned. In this anchor bias research that's been done, when they had somebody fill out an application, a question on it was, what's the most you've ever earned? And so by seeing that number, what they found with anchor biasing, the people with lower numbers, they considered as less capable than those who gave higher numbers. And that it was hard for people to imagine that someone was capable of more challenging work or different ways of engaging with work because of that single number. And I think the idea of anchor bias is a great one to consider, that sometimes we can be so weighted down by that one impression, we can't be lifted up, and we can't be inspired, and we can't be elevated to recognize all that's possible. There were all kinds of ways of contending with bias, and actually one of the things that I'm going to provide to folks in this week's materials, there is a test that people take around biases. And I'm going to have Mykal send that out along with that link to the presentation. That the song, I wanted for us to hear that song, and I also wanted to hear what the singer, what she had to say. That when we see someone, we can't know everything that's behind that person. She talked about, you can't see the hours that I've spent practicing scales. You can't see the number of times that people have looked at me and scoffed and thought, those ideas are crazy. But I'm conscious when that person shared about those experiences, she made more things visible. In the song, she talked about the dancers and the singers and the thinkers and the preachers, and talked about who wanted to be like Dr. Martin Luther King. And yet what she also recognized is that as magnificent as others are, we have to find who we are. We have to celebrate and recognize that we are divinely placed here to be exactly what we are. Now that doesn't mean that we're finished. It doesn't mean that, boy, here you are and great, just keep going on. I've wrestled whether to say this or not, but I am going to say it. One of the big lessons, I would say, from President Trump is that President Trump is someone who consistently blames others for the things that happen in the world. So when the coronavirus has folded out, his idea was that Obama left him empty-handed and without the equipment to deal with it. Now, anybody who looks at the real facts is going to know that actually it was President Trump's own choices and own decisions to dissect and pull apart all of those supports that had been in place. The thing about Donald Trump that is a great lesson is that how often do I blame others for the circumstances that I face? How much willingness do I have to step up and take responsibility? If nothing else, Donald Trump is an object lesson in How will I choose to take responsibility? I mean, if anyone has ever been consistent, this is a person who consistently says, that's not my fault, that's not my fault, that's not my fault, that's not my fault, that's not my fault. And most people, not most people, some people would say that continual pushing off responsibility doesn't necessarily work all that well, particularly in the role that he has. I was taught that if I'm going to be a leader, I have to take responsibility for everything that I bring forward. And I draw from others to bring forward. And if I've misunderstood what's come to me, then I have to step back. There's an operation that I'm going to share with you for taking responsibility. The one is, it's really hard. The one is oops. The action is ouch. Now, oops is when I have inadvertently stepped into something and I recognize myself stepping into it, making a mistake. Oops is a fairly non-judgmental, without due conditions, without heavy-duty complaining. Just oops is, I messed up. Oops, I'm sorry about that. Oops, I spoke before I thought. Or as soon as I heard what I spoke, I knew to turn. Please forgive me. The ouch side is when we're in the middle of a conversation and someone says something that is just offensive and we pick up on it. So ouch, when I hear that, and how much I would have loved as a kid to have these two simple steps of oops and ouch. When I was a little kid and heard my dad making jokes about Polacks, because that was in at the time. If I could have simply said ouch, you realize that one person that works for you comes from Polish descent. Ouch. Again, when I was a little kid, I heard the N-word used to describe black people. The N-word, if I'm a black person and I choose to use that word, but I'm not. So it's not a word that's eligible to me. It's not a word that belongs to me. But if I hear it being used, ouch. By what right do I have to say this? This week, Mykal and I saw this video of this woman who was just going bat crazy. These two African American men were doing yard work. And she was in a house down the street. So it wasn't her house. It wasn't her block. It was down the street. And she was, you effing ends. You effing bitches. And she just kept uttering this over and over again. And these two men were, God bless you, ma'am. God bless. God bless. I mean, there was so much restraint and kindness in response to this verbal vomit, this verbal abuse that was coming from this. And it was so disturbing that the man in the house next door to her came out and said, would you please stop this? You're really disturbing the peace. And then she turned around and said, you effing B, you effing B, you effing B, I'm going to kick your A, I'm going to kick your A, I'm entitled to. And I say this story because, ouch. respond out to men that were just, God bless you, ma'am. God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. Again, I just look at that with such awe and such respect and such gratitude that there can be that kind of grace and that kind of spaciousness. That rather than getting sucked into the whirlpool of her hate, and I mean, as somebody watching it, I had to think, she's really got some serious mental illness stuff, because her vocabulary is limited to this just element of rage and you effing B, you effing ends, you effing B's, you B ends, I'm going to kick your A. I mean, that was kind of the limit of what she had to say. And the ouch you is a response that lets us be in the world without the same level of antagonism. Words that were hurled out were meeting. So who we are is that we get to be what most inspires us in the world. We get to mirror and reflect back to those that lift us up. We get to be all of our histories, and we get to choose which part of our history makes the most sense here and now. And who we are beings that become continually more clear about how we can be in the world. That we can let go of our biases. And by letting go of our biases, we are free to have a greater extent of we. I was going to look it up, but I didn't have time because it came to me this morning on the drive here. And it's the idea that someone could draw a line separating me from you. You draw the line. And what I do is I draw a circle around you and I. And rather than let that line end the conversation, I let that circle, I let that presence of inclusion be more. So who we are, when those lines get drawn, we can decide, am I going to let myself be overwhelmed by the lines that are drawn? Or do I draw bigger circles? And so it is. So, thank you for joining us at Northern Lights Community Center, Spiritual Center, either on Facebook or on Zoom today. We will be here in these ways next Sunday. And we have the pleasure of getting to hear from Reverend Pamela Grace, the founding minister of Northern Lights. And we have the delight of having Stephanie Scranton, our practitioner, with us. If you would like to donate to the center, please go to our website, which is northernlightsspiritualcenter.com. One long word, .com. And you can hit the donate button. If you joined via Zoom, you're invited to stay for our post-talk conversation with any insights, ahas, or ouch, Vaughan, what were you thinking? So, I close prayer. I invite us to just close our eyes for a moment. And as I did earlier in the service today, we considered a being of inspiration. We considered another being of inspiration and another being of inspiration. We considered who we are. We considered that our biases, those lenses that block out the light and the beauty of what is available in the world, can be. We considered that all of our past brings us forward to today. And in this consideration, I acknowledge that there is one light, one life, one presence, one being, one wholeness, one love, one unity that holds us all. That no matter how many lines get drawn, no matter how many oops we pronounce, we have to declare that this one life, this one presence holds us all. And I give thanks. I give thanks that this one life, this one love, this one presence, this one being, this one beauty, this one truth has so many ways of expressing in the world. And I release these words to the automatic action of the law, that aspect of the divine, which is ever and always saying yes. And I say, and so it is.
And so it is.